Well, hi everybody. So today I'll be having a look at the F7 simulations Eagle S100 and R100. Now, for the purposes of the review, I'm pretty much just going to focus on the S100. I will go ahead and go through the differences between the two once we do get to the actual review, but for starting it up, taking it up, and flying it around and everything like that, we're just going to focus on the S100. This is a pretty nice little aerobatic aircraft for Microsoft Flight Simulator. It may not be a real aircraft. It is, let's say, inspired by real-world aircraft, but it's not a real one. Either way, it does not bother me. This is an absolutely fantastic thing to go fly, and we're going to have a look at it today. So let's go ahead and get started here. Alrighty, well, here we are in the cockpit of the S100. Take a quick spin around the cockpit here real quick and have a look at it. But overall, it's a really nice looking model. Texture quality is very good in here. No complaints whatsoever. And there's really not much to say about it. It's absolutely a really nice looking interior model here. It looks good up close and it looks good at a distance. So we're going to go ahead and run through some of the features here real quick and then get this thing started. Alrighty, well, we'll go through the features here. There's not too many. Obviously, probably the most noticeable one right now is the fact that we can open the canopy, which is always a nice touch. And then we have aerobatic smoke, which is a necessity on planes like this, but this little red button here on top of the stick is going to be the click point inside of the cockpit. There is a keybind for it, which is going to be toggle logo lights. I recommend, mapping that to something to make this easier. The other thing we have down here is this switch here that's labeled physics inside of the cockpit, and when we hover over it, it's labeled strobe lights. That's because strobe lights is the shortcut for this switch. So map something to toggle strobe lights, and then this will come on. So when we flip it, we get this little plaque up here. Now, if you don't know what this is, don't worry. There is a pretty nice little introduction to aerobatics in the manual that F7 Simulations put together. And if you look at this and none of these symbols make any sense to you, but you do know what this is, don't worry. There's also a legend in there that will explain to you what all of these things mean. If you know what it is, then you know what it is. Now, one of the things I thought was pretty neat about this was not necessarily that it's in here, but that it's relatively easy to swap this one out for your own sequence of stunts if you wanted to. Now, I say with relative ease because you'll probably have to have at least a little bit of an understanding of how to do a custom livery for Microsoft Flight Simulator. You won't have to make your own livery, but there's some aspects of that that you'll kind of need to understand to do this. But there is an explanation in the manual as well on how to do this. So that's also nice. But you could replace this with real world sequences or come up with your own and put them in here, and you I'd say fairly simply just kind of have to copy and paste something. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but for the sake of the review here, it's pretty much a copy and paste thing. You will need to have either Photoshop or GIMP to make this work. GIMP is free, so if you don't want to spend the money on Photoshop, then GIMP is free. Alrighty, well, we'll go ahead and get this thing started real quick. There's not too much to it, but we want to make sure that we've selected a tank on the fuel selector there, preferably one that has fuel in it. We'll come up here to the battery. We'll flip the battery switch on. We'll flip the alternator on as long as we're over there. Go over to the right side, flip on the left and the right magneto, and then we'll come down here to where the starter is. We can go ahead and turn the fuel pump on if you want, but it's not necessary to start it or to really fly it. The last thing I will say before we start this thing is I would hold a brake down because this thing has a tendency to want to roll when you first start it. But we'll go ahead and click on the starter here, and we'll start right up. Go ahead and close the canopy up here and head out to the runway. Alrighty, well, we're going to go ahead and take this thing off. Real quick before we do, there are some recommendations in the manual on page 9, I believe it is, about joystick and rudder settings that might help you out. I will say that I flew this thing around for about 20 minutes without using any of those settings, and then after that 20 minutes, I went and set the joystick and the rudder pedals and everything like that up per their recommendations. It was not a bad thing to fly before doing that, but once I used their recommendations and sort of the curves and everything like that, I will say that ground handling improved quite a bit. So without using their setup, the rudder inputs were a little bit twitchy and things like that, really smoothed everything out. And I will say that my rolls were a little spongy, and then I again implemented their recommendations, and my rolls got real nice and crispy. So if you're having a little bit of trouble with it, that might be something to look into. There probably is a little bit of room to play with all those things, but it's definitely a really nice starting point for it. So we're going to go ahead here and take this thing off. Now, I do want to let everybody know that I've only landed and taken this thing off about 3 times. So my recommendations on how to take this thing off might not be perfect, but it will at least get you off the ground pretty nicely. So we'll go ahead here and just throttle up. It is a very well-behaved plane on the ground, so you might need a few rudder inputs just to kind of keep the thing straight a little bit, but not too much. And then once we get to about 60 knots, we can pretty much just lift off the ground here. Now once we're in the air, this thing is absolutely fantastic. It's incredibly stable, it's very controlled, and it is just an absolute joy to fly. Now I gotta, you know, very rarely do I say something like this, but this plane actually made me very happy. Like when I came home and realized that this thing was available, and I picked it up in about 5 seconds, I was like, this is so great. I didn't even know I wanted this thing, but I'm so happy that it's here. It is an absolutely great aerobatic aircraft for this game. The way that it feels when you fly it is really nice. It does all kinds of stunts. It has an incredible roll rate. It has about a 58 knot stall speed. It flies really nicely at slow speeds. It does really nice loops, rolls, everything. Stalls are fantastic. You can do inverted flat spins in this thing. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff. It will do all of them with, at least to me, what seems relatively easy. It didn't take much practice. I mean, in 5 minutes I had done an inverted flat spin and was pretty much sold on this thing. So, as far as how it flies, it's really nice. Now, I'm going to say something here that I also never say, which is that of the aerobatic aircraft that I have in this game, this is the only one I want to fly now. I don't want to fly any of the other ones. This thing is basically, you know, taking the crown from all of them. So this one is the one that I'll fly all the time, and all the rest of that stuff. I really cannot stress how much I thoroughly enjoy this plane. But either way, there's not too much to say about it. It has a pretty nice sound set here when we're in the cockpit. The cockpit itself I really like. The layout is nice. Considering this isn't a real plane or anything like that, the cockpit is set up in a nice, the instrument panel is set up in a really nice way. Everything's pretty much within my peripheral and I can see it while I'm flying real nicely. So it's absolutely fantastic. Now there is something I did want to mention about the sights out here on the wing. There's a note in the manual that if your camera position is not in the default position, they may not line up perfectly. Now for me, I sit a little bit further back, so it's a little zoomed out. Sometimes I sit a little bit higher, but I think right now we're at the default camera height. Either way, it's not that big of a deal to me. I haven't noticed any problem with it, but they do make a note in the manual that they are planning on making it so that it's somehow adjustable, so that it lines up no matter what I'm assuming that no matter what your camera settings are, there's some way to adjust it. Either way, it's an absolutely fantastic plane to go fly. And I think we're pretty much just going to bring it in here for a landing. Otherwise, I'm going to sit here and fly this thing around and ramble on for about 30 more minutes. So we'll just, I'll see y'all back here when I get lined up for the runway. Alrighty. Well, again, same issue, or I'm issuing the same warning I did when I took off. Only landed this thing about 3 times. But it seems 60 knots is about the right speed to set it down at. The one time I tried it around about 65, it bounced pretty bad. So we'll just bring it in here at about 60 knots. Or we'll touch down at about 60 knots. Again, it's a real well-behaved plane, so we'll just let it kind of sit down here. We'll 3-point land it just to be safe. Go ahead and ground the tail wheel. We'll start to get on the brakes. Now the brakes are not, again, your stereotypical Microsoft Flight Simulator brakes. This thing is not going to stop on a dime. It does not have bad brakes or anything like that. It just might take a little bit of a distance to actually bring it to a complete stop. I don't have a problem with that because I do find it a little unbelievable that I can stop the Beechcraft at about 20 feet. But either way, it is a very nice plane to go fly. It's very nice, well-behaved. Even taxiing it around is nice. It's a really cannot. I have no idea how happy I am about this plane. But either way, that's pretty much it for this part. So we're going to go into the review next, and that'll pretty much be it for today. Alrighty, well, if you would like to pick up the F7 Simulations Eagle, it's available on the sim market for about 15 bucks. As far as what you get for your money, you get 2 variants of the Eagle, the S100 and the R100. Each comes with 5 liveries. It's the same 5 for each variant. The short version is that it looks good, it sounds good, and it's an absolute blast to fly. Now, as far as the difference between the S and the R, the way the manual describes it is the S is the aerobatic version, the R is the race version. As far as the weight, speeds, and power, they're identical. The roll rates in the R are toned down a bit. Well, you go from 470 degrees per second with the S to 420 degrees per second with the R. It's not that much of a difference. The exterior models vary slightly. The S will have sights on the wings, while the R has some winglets in place of the sights. The model looks fantastic, both in the interior and the exterior. There aren't any gaps, and everything fits together really nice. There's nothing really to complain about as far as the model goes, so we're just going to move on. The texturing is top-notch on this one. I'm going to focus mostly on the interior because there are more types of materials there, but the carbon fiber looks great, the seats look great. Everything really does look spectacular on this one, so you can kind of combine all those things together and you have a really nice looking aircraft. The sound set comes across well. I'm going to say something here I'm not 100% sure about, but I think this thing uses the extras engine sounds. I'm not going to knock it for using the extra sounds if that's what F7 did, because it somehow sounds better than the default extra. As far as the rest of the sounds go, I'll just be brief, they're good. I did want to point out that I thought the canopy sounds were quite nice, and I also wanted to point out that I thought the sort of G-load rattles were quite nice as well. But overall, the sounds are good, and if you really get nitpicky with it, they might be a little generic, but they're fine for me. As far as how this thing flies, it's absolutely phenomenal. It feels great to fly. It has some nice visual cues when you put excessive stress on it and things like that. It's smooth, it's stable, and it's predictable. It's very controllable. You can get it to do exactly what you want it to do, albeit you might need a little bit of practice to do it nicely. I know that I do. Under its own power, it's going to do something around like 170 to 180 knots. The never exceed speed is about 240 according to the manual. As far as systems complexity goes, it's pretty simple. It lacks engine damage or a built-in failure system, which is not a complaint. It's not something I would expect from a plane under $20. So I'm going to kind of combine the features and conclusion here, but one of the things I thought was really nice, and I guess it's not technically a feature, but the fact that they had sort of an introduction to aerobatics in the manual I thought was a really nice touch, especially for people that are beginners, because if you look at one of those sequence diagrams for the first time, I know when the first time I did, I went, what the hell does any of this mean? So it's kind of nice to have, you know, a legend and some explanation of the aerobatic maneuvers and things like that. Now, S7 Simulations has like thoroughly impressed me with this plane. I really am. It's a spectacular plane. I also want to mention the design of it is great. Like, this is not a real aircraft, and it fits in here perfectly. It looks like a real aerobatic aircraft. Like, you wouldn't know that this isn't a real plane if you didn't actually know that. I really like the layout of the cockpit. I like the instrument panel layout as well. So everything really came together real nicely with this one. Now, as far as the flight model goes, I think that's the high point of this plane. It's an absolute joy to fly. I've been having so much fun testing it out, and I've really only been able to fly it for about an hour and a half. So I wanted to go ahead and get this review done as quickly as I possibly can, because this is eating into the amount of time that I have to go fly this plane. I really do want to go fly it. So as far as everything goes, there's nothing in Microsoft Flight Simulator that really compares to this in terms of like aerobatic capabilities, at least that I have. And it's to the point where I don't really want to fly anything but this now. So, you know, and on top of all of that, this thing is under $20, so you really can't go wrong with it. So just in case you haven't figured it out by now, I really like this thing. And I'm pretty much going to sign off now so that I can go fly it some more, go have some more fun with it. But thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see y'all next time.